Carl Jung exposed a truth that every experienced man learns the hard way. There exists a specific female profile that, once identified, must be immediately rejected. But why do most men only discover this after years of suffering and disappointment? Jung, through decades of studying the human psyche, identified female behavioral patterns that function as psychological traps. These profiles aren't obvious. On the contrary, they are seductive, engaging, and frequently masked by characteristics that appear positive at first glance. The question you must ask yourself is, how many times have you felt attracted to a woman who, deep down, you knew would bring problems? Jung discovered this isn't coincidence. It's an archetypal pattern deeply rooted in the collective unconscious. The experienced man isn't born knowing this. He learns through pain, observation, and self-knowledge. But what if you could identify these profiles before becoming emotionally involved? What if you could protect your masculine energy from subtle manipulations that drain your essence? Jung understood that some women live in a constant state of victimhood, where every situation becomes a tragedy and every person becomes either a savior or an enemy. This isn't about genuine hardship or real struggles that deserve compassion. This is about a psychological pattern where drama becomes the primary source of identity and attention. The experienced man recognizes this immediately. She always has a story about how someone wronged her. Her ex was terrible, her boss is unfair, her friends betrayed her, her family doesn't understand her. At first, your masculine instinct kicks in. You want to protect and help. You think you can be different, that you can be the one who finally treats her right. But here's what Jung discovered through his work. This pattern isn't about external circumstances. It's about an internal need to remain in the victim position because it provides certain psychological benefits. It generates sympathy, avoids personal responsibility, and creates a constant stream of emotional intensity that some people mistake for passion or depth. The dangerous part is how seductive this can be for men. Your protective instincts get triggered. You feel needed, important, like a hero riding in to save the day. She makes you feel special because you're different from all the others who hurt her. But gradually you realize that no matter what you do, there's always another crisis, another person to blame, another reason why she can't be happy. What starts as wanting to help becomes walking on eggshells. You find yourself constantly managing her emotions, trying to prevent the next breakdown, avoiding topics that might trigger another victim story. Your own needs get pushed aside because her emotional emergencies always take priority. Jung would say this represents an underdeveloped aspect of the feminine psyche, the inability to take ownership of one's life circumstances and emotional responses. Instead of growing through challenges, she uses them as evidence of her perpetual persecution. This creates a psychological prison where growth becomes impossible because growth requires taking responsibility. The experienced man has learned that you cannot save someone from a victim mentality. It's not about love, understanding, or the right approach. It's about a fundamental choice that person must make to stop seeing themselves as powerless. Until that internal shift happens, every relationship becomes another chapter in their victim story. You'll notice she never seems to learn from past experiences. The same patterns repeat with different people. She doesn't connect her own behavior to the outcomes she experiences. There's always an external reason for her problems, never an internal one to examine. The most telling sign is how she responds to your attempts to encourage personal growth or suggest she might have some control over her situations. Instead of curiosity or openness, you get defensiveness and more victim stories to prove how wrong you are. She's invested in being powerless because power means responsibility, and responsibility means she can no longer blame others for her unhappiness. This doesn't make her a bad person, but it makes her incompatible with a healthy relationship. Jung understood that relationships require two people who take ownership of their emotional states and life circumstances. When one person is committed to being a victim, the other person inevitably becomes either an enabler or another villain in their story. 2. The compulsive savior, the danger of those who fix everything. Jung recognized another dangerous pattern in the feminine psyche, the woman who needs to save, fix, and rescue everyone around her. On the surface, this looks like kindness and compassion. Society even celebrates this as a wonderful feminine quality, but the experienced man knows there's something much darker underneath this compulsive helping behavior. This woman can't see people as complete, capable beings. Everyone needs her intervention, her wisdom, her emotional labor. She swoops in to solve problems that weren't hers to solve, gives advice that wasn't asked for, and creates dependencies that serve her psychological needs more than helping anyone else. The trap for men is obvious. She makes you feel cared for, nurtured, like someone finally understands your struggles and wants to help. She seems so giving, so selfless, so different from more selfish women you might have encountered. You think you found someone who truly cares about your well-being and success. But Jung understood that compulsive helping behavior often stems from a need for control and superiority disguised as love. She needs you to need her. Your independence threatens her sense of purpose and identity. Your problems become her projects, and your growth must happen according to her timeline and methods. What starts as helpful support becomes suffocating micromanagement. She has opinions about your career choices, your friendships, your family relationships, your personal habits. She frames it as caring, but it's really about her need to be indispensable. She creates problems where none existed so she can provide solutions. The experienced man recognizes that healthy support looks completely different. It respects boundaries, encourages independence, and allows people to make their own mistakes and learn their own lessons. Real care doesn't need to insert itself into every aspect of someone's life. This woman often has a history of relationships with broken, troubled, or significantly younger men, not because she's attracted to these qualities, but because these men provide the perfect opportunity for her rescuing behavior. She's not actually attracted to strength and stability because those qualities don't need her intervention. You'll notice she gets uncomfortable when you start handling things on your own. When you solve problems without her input or make decisions without consulting her, she feels threatened rather than proud. She might even create subtle obstacles to your independence or dismiss your capable moments as lucky accidents. Jung would say this represents a distorted expression of the nurturing feminine archetype. Instead of creating space for growth and supporting natural development, it becomes a controlling force that keeps others small and dependent. The helping becomes a form of psychological imprisonment disguised as love. The most dangerous aspect is how good it feels initially. Being cared for, having someone invested in your success, feeling like your problems matter to someone else. These are legitimate human needs. But when that care comes with strings attached, when it requires your dependence to continue, it stops being love and becomes manipulation. By the way, if you're curious to go even deeper and integrate your shadows and light, check out the SIM Method ebook. It's a concise guide that can help you unlock your inner power in just 5 minutes a day. The link is in the first pinned comment below. 3. The disguised competitor, when she sees you as a rival. Jung understood that some women approach relationships not as partnerships, but as competitions where there must be a winner and a loser. This isn't the obvious, aggressive competition that's easy to spot. This is the subtle, disguised version that masquerades as support while systematically undermining your confidence and success. The experienced man has learned to recognize the signs. She can't genuinely celebrate your victories. When you share good news, there's always a but or a way to diminish it. When you're excited about an achievement, she finds ways to redirect the conversation to her own accomplishments or point out potential problems with your success. This woman sees your confidence as a threat to her position. In her mind, there's only so much success, attention, or admiration to go around, and anything you receive takes away from what she could have. She operates from a scarcity mindset where your growth means her diminishment. What makes this particularly dangerous is how it's packaged. She frames her competitive behavior as being realistic, practical, or protective. When she points out potential flaws in your plans, she's just being helpful. When she mentions how difficult your goals will be to achieve, she's managing your expectations. When she subtly criticizes your ideas, she's offering valuable feedback. Jung would recognize this as a fundamental inability to exist in a state of mutual support and shared success. Instead of the relationship being a place where both people can flourish, it becomes a zero-sum game where one person's light must be dimmed for the other to shine. You'll notice she has a particular talent for timing. Her criticisms come right after your victories. Her doubts surface just when you're feeling confident. Her problems require your attention exactly when you're focused on your own goals. This isn't coincidence. It's unconscious sabotage designed to keep you from getting too far ahead. The experienced man knows this dynamic is impossible to fix through communication or understanding. It's not about explaining how her behavior affects you or trying to create more supportive patterns. It's about a fundamental orientation toward life that sees relationships as competitions rather than partnerships. She might also compare you unfavorably to other men in subtle ways. Your friend makes more money. Her ex was more romantic. That guy at her work is funnier. These comparisons serve to keep you striving for her approval while never quite measuring up to impossible, shifting standards. What's particularly insidious is how this affects your own relationship with success and confidence. Over time, you start second-guessing your achievements, downplaying your victories, and avoiding ambitious goals because you know they'll create tension. You begin to shrink yourself to accommodate her need to feel superior. Jung understood that healthy relationships create space for both people to excel without threatening the partnership. When someone sees your success as their failure, when your confidence makes them insecure, when your growth triggers their competitive instincts, the relationship becomes a prison for your potential rather than a platform for mutual flourishing. 4. The attention collector. The void that never fills. Jung identified a particularly exhausting pattern in certain women: the insatiable need for constant attention, validation, and admiration from multiple sources. This isn't about healthy social connection or enjoying compliments. This is about a psychological black hole that consumes attention but never reaches satisfaction, leaving everyone around her drained and competing for scraps of her focus. The experienced man recognizes this immediately, though it often takes time to understand the full scope. She always needs to be the center of attention in any room. Conversations must revolve around her experiences, her feelings, her stories, her problems. When attention shifts to someone else, she finds ways to redirect it back to herself, often through dramatic statements, sudden emotional needs, or manufactured crises. What makes this particularly dangerous for men is how flattering it feels initially. She gives you intense attention and focus during the early stages. You feel like the most important person in her world. She hangs on your every word, seems fascinated by your thoughts, and makes you feel incredibly special and desired. This creates a powerful psychological bond that becomes harder to break as the pattern reveals itself. But Jung understood that this intense focus isn't about genuine interest in you as a person. It's about what you can provide in terms of attention, validation, and emotional energy. You're not a partner. You're a source, one of many she needs to maintain her psychological equilibrium. The moment you stop providing that constant stream of admiration and focus, you become replaceable. You'll notice she has an extensive network of male admirers, each serving different functions in her attention economy. There's the guy who compliments her photos, the one who listens to her problems, the one who takes her out when she's bored, the one who provides intellectual stimulation. You might think you're special, but you're actually just filling a specific role in her collection. The exhausting part is how much energy she requires. Every day brings new needs for validation. Did you notice her new haircut? Do you think she's prettier than other women? How much do you miss her when she's gone? Are you proud to be with her? The questions never end, because the void never fills. No amount of attention is ever enough to create lasting satisfaction. Jung would say this represents a fundamental disconnection from internal self-worth. Instead of developing a stable sense of self, she relies entirely on external validation to feel valuable. This creates an addiction-like pattern where she needs increasingly more attention to achieve the same psychological effect. What satisfied her yesterday won't be enough today. This woman often uses social media obsessively, not for genuine connection, but as a validation delivery system. She needs constant likes, comments, and reactions to feel alive. She measures her worth by metrics and numbers, and any decrease in attention feels like a personal crisis requiring immediate action to restore the supply. The experienced man has learned that trying to fill this void is impossible. You can give her all your attention, cancel your own plans, prioritize her emotional needs above everything else, and it will never be enough. She will always need more sources, more validation, more proof that she's worthy of attention. Your sacrifice doesn't satisfy her. It just proves that she can extract that level of devotion, making her hunger for the next source. What's particularly damaging is how this affects your other relationships. She becomes jealous of any attention you give to friends, family, hobbies, or career goals. Everything becomes competition for the attention she believes belongs to her. Your world shrinks as you try to manage her insecurity about not being the constant center of your universe. The most telling sign is how she responds when you're going through difficult times and need support yourself. Instead of being able to shift focus to your needs, she finds ways to make your problems about her or creates competing crises that demand immediate attention. She cannot exist in a supportive role because it requires her to step out of the spotlight, which feels like psychological death. 5. The subtle controller. Manipulation through affection. Jung understood that the most dangerous form of control comes disguised as love and care. The experienced man has learned to recognize the woman who uses affection, emotional intimacy, and seemingly loving gestures as tools of manipulation and control. This isn't the obvious, aggressive control that's easy to spot and resist. This is the kind that makes you feel guilty for even noticing it. She doesn't demand compliance through anger or threats. Instead, she uses your love for her against you. When you don't do what she wants, she withdraws affection, becomes distant, or acts hurt and disappointed. She makes you feel like caring about her means doing what she wants, and any resistance proves you don't really love her. The trap is incredibly sophisticated because it exploits your genuine feelings. You do care about her happiness, you do want to avoid hurting her, and you do value harmony in the relationship. She uses these healthy impulses to guide your behavior in directions that serve her needs, rather than the relationship's needs. Jung would recognize this as a manipulation of the attachment system. She creates an environment where your emotional security depends on keeping her happy, and keeping her happy requires increasing compliance with her preferences, opinions, and decisions. Your own needs and desires get reframed as selfish obstacles to love. You'll notice that her emotional responses don't match the situations that trigger them. Small decisions become major relationship issues if they don't align with her preferences. Choosing to spend time with friends becomes about whether you prioritize the relationship. Having different opinions becomes about respect and understanding. Every choice gets loaded with relationship significance. The experienced man recognizes how this differs from healthy influence in relationships. In healthy dynamics, partners express their needs clearly, accept that compromise sometimes means not getting what you want, and respect each other's autonomy even when it's inconvenient. Control through affection makes every decision a test of love. She becomes an expert at emotional manipulation techniques without necessarily conscious awareness. She knows exactly which buttons to push to make you feel guilty, responsible for her emotional state, or afraid of losing her approval. She can shift from loving to distant in moments, training you to avoid behaviors that trigger these shifts. What makes this particularly damaging is how it affects your ability to trust your own judgment and feelings. When every decision gets filtered through, how will this affect her mood? You lose connection to your own inner guidance system. You start making choices based on managing her emotional reactions rather than what actually makes sense for your life. The subtle controller often has a talent for making her preferences seem like natural consequences rather than personal demands. She doesn't say, "I don't want you to go out with your friends." Instead, she becomes sad, withdrawn, or anxious when you make these plans, forcing you to choose between your social life and her emotional stability. Jung understood that healthy love creates freedom, not dependency. When someone uses your feelings for them to limit your choices, influence your decisions, or control your behavior, it stops being love and becomes emotional imprisonment. The cage is built from affection, but it's still a cage. The most insidious aspect is how she frames your growing awareness of these patterns. If you start to recognize the manipulation, she doesn't deny it. She reframes it as proof of how much she needs you, how deeply she feels, or how sensitive she is to the relationship dynamics. Your recognition becomes another tool for manipulation rather than grounds for change. The experienced man has learned that no amount of love can justify surrendering your autonomy. When affection comes with conditions, when care requires control, when love demands compliance, it's not love at all. It's manipulation, dressed in loving language. 6. The eternal princess, rights without responsibilities. Jung recognized a particularly destructive feminine archetype, the woman who believes she deserves special treatment, constant care, and endless privileges without offering anything meaningful in return. This isn't about appreciating genuine gestures of love or enjoying being treated well. This is about a fundamental belief that the world owes her comfort, luxury, and attention simply because she exists. The experienced man has learned to spot this mentality quickly, though it often disguises itself as charm and femininity in the beginning. She expects doors to be opened, bills to be paid, problems to be solved, and needs to be met without reciprocating any of these behaviors. She sees herself as the prize in the relationship, not as an equal partner contributing to something meaningful together. What makes this particularly dangerous is how society often reinforces this behavior. She's been told she's special, that she deserves the best, that she should never settle for less than perfect treatment. These messages, taken to an extreme, create a person who believes they're entitled to receive without giving, to be served without serving, to be loved without loving back in equal measure. Jung would understand this as a failure to develop emotional maturity and reciprocity. Instead of learning that relationships require mutual investment, she remains stuck in a childlike state where others exist primarily to meet her needs. She never develops the psychological muscles required for partnership because she never had to use them. You'll notice she has very specific expectations about how she should be treated, but almost no awareness of how she treats others. She expects expensive gifts but gives thoughtless ones. She expects emotional support during her difficult times but becomes unavailable during yours. She expects patience with her moods but shows no tolerance for your human moments. The experienced man recognizes that this creates an exhausting dynamic where you're constantly giving more than you're receiving. You become the one responsible for making the relationship work, keeping her happy, solving problems, and maintaining the connection. She becomes the one who judges whether your efforts are sufficient while contributing minimal effort herself. This woman often has a history of relationships where men eventually became resentful or distant. She doesn't connect this pattern to her own behavior. Instead, she sees it as proof that men don't know how to treat a quality woman, or that she hasn't found someone who truly appreciates her worth. What's particularly frustrating is how she responds to any suggestion that relationships require mutual effort. She becomes offended, hurt, or angry at the implication that she should change anything about her approach. In her mind, asking her to contribute more is the same as asking her to lower her standards or accept less than she deserves. Jung understood that healthy relationships require both people to show up fully. When one person positions themselves as the recipient of effort rather than a contributor to the partnership, it creates an unsustainable dynamic that leads to resentment and emotional exhaustion. The experienced man has learned that this mentality doesn't change through love, patience, or understanding. It changes through consequences and boundaries. But she typically leaves relationships rather than accepting that she needs to contribute equally. She prefers to find someone new who will maintain the imbalanced dynamic rather than grow into genuine partnership. You'll also notice she often compares her treatment to how other women are treated, but the comparison always focuses on what she's receiving, never on what she's giving. She knows exactly how much her friend's boyfriend spent on her birthday gift, but she has no awareness of how much emotional labor that friend provides in return. The most telling sign is how she responds to your needs, problems, or difficult periods. Instead of stepping up to support you the way you support her, she becomes inconvenienced, impatient, or finds ways to make your struggles about how they affect her. She signed up to be adored, not to be a partner through life's challenges. 7. The emotional unstable, psychological roller coaster. Jung understood that some women live in a constant state of emotional chaos, where feelings change rapidly and intensely without apparent reason or connection to external circumstances. This isn't about having bad days or going through difficult periods that everyone experiences. This is about a fundamental inability to maintain emotional equilibrium that turns every relationship into an unpredictable psychological roller coaster. The experienced man has learned to recognize this pattern early, though it often takes time to understand the full scope of what he's dealing with. One moment she's incredibly happy and affectionate. The next she's devastated or angry about something minor. Her emotional responses are disproportionate to the situations that trigger them, and her moods can shift multiple times within a single conversation. What makes this particularly challenging is how intense and genuine her emotions feel in the moment. When she's happy, she's ecstatic. When she's sad, she's completely devastated. When she's angry, she's furious. The depth of feeling can be intoxicating initially because it seems to indicate passion and emotional depth. You might think you found someone who feels deeply and loves intensely. But Jung would recognize this as a lack of emotional regulation and internal stability rather than depth or passion. Healthy emotions respond appropriately to situations and maintain some consistency over time. When someone's emotional state changes rapidly and dramatically without clear external causes, it indicates internal psychological chaos rather than emotional richness. You'll notice that being in a relationship with her requires constant emotional management. You have to carefully monitor your words and actions because almost anything can trigger an intense emotional reaction. Conversations become minefields where innocent comments can explode into major relationship crises. You start walking on eggshells, editing yourself to avoid triggering the next emotional storm. The experienced man understands that this dynamic is exhausting and unsustainable. Your own emotional needs get pushed aside because her emotional emergencies always take priority. You become focused on managing her moods rather than building a genuine connection. The relationship becomes about crisis management rather than growth and partnership. This woman often has difficulty maintaining stable relationships, jobs, or living situations because her emotional instability affects every area of her life. She burns bridges with friends, creates drama at work, and struggles to maintain consistent behavior over time. She might blame external circumstances, but the pattern follows her everywhere. What's particularly dangerous is how she uses her emotional instability as a form of control. When she doesn't get what she wants, the emotional reaction is so intense and unpleasant that people often give in just to restore peace. She learns, often unconsciously, that emotional chaos gets her needs met, even when direct communication doesn't work. Jung would understand this as a failure to develop emotional maturity and self-regulation. Instead of learning to process feelings internally and respond appropriately to situations, she remains stuck in a childlike state where emotions control behavior rather than being processed and integrated. The experienced man has learned that you cannot stabilize someone else's emotional state through love, patience, or understanding. Emotional regulation is an internal skill that must be developed by the individual. Trying to manage someone else's emotions just enables the pattern while exhausting yourself. You'll also notice that her emotional instability often gets worse under stress rather than better. Instead of rising to meet challenges, she becomes more chaotic and unpredictable. This makes it impossible to build a stable life together because any pressure or difficulty sends her into emotional tailspin. The most telling sign is how she responds to suggestions about getting help or developing better emotional regulation skills. Instead of recognizing that her emotional patterns are problematic, she becomes defensive and frames the suggestion as an attack on her authenticity or sensitivity. She's invested in her emotional chaos as a part of her identity rather than seeing it as something to heal and grow beyond. 8. The status hunter. When you're just a trophy. Jung understood that some women approach relationships not as genuine connections between two people, but as strategic moves in their personal status game. The experienced man has learned to recognize when he's being evaluated not for who he is as a person, but for what he represents in terms of social position, financial security, or image enhancement. This woman doesn't fall in love with you. She falls in love with what you can do for her reputation. She's attracted to your job title, your income potential, your social connections, or how good you look together in photos. You become a human accessory designed to elevate her perceived value in the eyes of others. What makes this particularly insidious is how it can feel flattering initially. She seems impressed by your accomplishments, interested in your career, and proud to be associated with your success. You might think you found someone who truly appreciates your achievements and supports your ambitions. The attention feels validating, and the relationship seems to enhance both of your lives. But Jung would recognize this as a fundamental misunderstanding of what creates genuine connection between people. When someone is primarily attracted to your external circumstances rather than your internal qualities, the relationship becomes conditional on maintaining those circumstances. Your worth to her depends entirely on what you can provide in terms of status enhancement. You'll notice she's very interested in certain aspects of your life while being completely indifferent to others. She wants to know about your salary, your career prospects, your family background, or your social connections. But she shows little curiosity about your thoughts, feelings, values, or the experiences that shaped who you are as a person. The experienced man recognizes how this creates a hollow relationship foundation. She's not interested in your struggles, your growth, your fears, or your dreams unless they relate to status advancement. She wants the successful version of you, not the complete human being with complexities, vulnerabilities, and imperfections. This woman often has very specific requirements for relationships that read like a job description rather than qualities that create emotional connection. He must make a certain amount of money, work in specific industries, drive particular cars, live in certain neighborhoods, or come from acceptable family backgrounds. Love becomes a strategic decision rather than an emotional experience. What's particularly damaging is how this affects your sense of self-worth within the relationship. You start to feel valuable only when you're achieving, earning, or succeeding at levels that maintain her interest. Your human moments, times when you're struggling, questioning, or just being ordinary, become threats to the relationship rather than opportunities for deeper connection. Jung would understand this as a projection of internal insecurity onto external circumstances. Instead of developing genuine self-worth, she attempts to feel valuable through association with valuable people and things. Your success becomes her success, but only in terms of how it reflects on her, not because she genuinely cares about your fulfillment. The experienced man has learned that this dynamic becomes more obvious during difficult times. When you face challenges, setbacks, or periods of uncertainty, her support disappears rather than deepening. She becomes distant, critical, or starts exploring other options because you're no longer serving your function as a status enhancer. You'll also notice she's very concerned with how the relationship appears to others. She wants the right photos for social media, the impressive anniversary celebrations, the enviable vacation destinations. The relationship becomes a performance for an audience rather than a private connection between two people who genuinely care about each other. The most telling sign is how she talks about her past relationships. She focuses on what those men had or didn't have rather than who they were as people. She measures relationship success by external metrics rather than emotional satisfaction or personal growth. Her dating history reads like a resume of status symbols rather than a journey of human connection. This woman often becomes bored or restless when relationships settle into comfortable, everyday rhythms. She needs the relationship to continue providing status enhancement, which requires constant proof of your value and achievement. Ordinary moments of connection, quiet intimacy, or simple companionship don't satisfy her because they don't serve her status needs. Jung understood that healthy relationships are built on mutual appreciation of each other's humanity, not on what each person can provide in terms of external enhancement. When someone sees you primarily as a status symbol, you become replaceable the moment someone with better credentials comes along. You're not a partner. You're a strategic asset in her personal advancement game. Jung's greatest insight wasn't just identifying these destructive patterns, but understanding why men repeatedly fall into these traps despite the obvious warning signs. The answer lies in the collision between masculine psychology and feminine manipulation tactics that exploit our deepest biological and emotional programming. The experienced man understands that recognizing these patterns isn't about becoming cynical or bitter toward women. It's about developing the psychological sophistication to distinguish between genuine feminine energy that enhances life and toxic patterns that drain it. Jung believed that men must develop what he called conscious masculinity, the ability to maintain attraction and connection while protecting their essential energy and purpose. Most men learn these lessons through painful experience because our culture doesn't prepare us for the psychological complexity of modern relationships. We're taught to be providers and protectors, but we're never taught how to recognize when those instincts are being weaponized against us. We're encouraged to be understanding and patient, but we're never warned about the difference between supporting someone's growth and enabling their dysfunction. The masculine psyche contains powerful drives toward protection, provision, and partnership that served us well in simpler times. But in today's complex social environment, these same drives can become vulnerabilities when encountered by women who have learned to exploit them. The perpetual victim triggers your protective instincts. The compulsive savior appeals to your desire to be needed. The disguised competitor challenges your ego, and so on. Jung discovered that healthy relationships require both people to have developed what he called individuation, the process of becoming a complete, self-aware individual capable of genuine partnership. The patterns we've discussed represent failures of individuation where the woman remains stuck in immature psychological states that prevent real connection. The experienced man has learned that you cannot love someone into psychological maturity. You cannot provide enough attention to fill an empty void. You cannot give enough validation to create genuine self-worth. You cannot sacrifice enough of yourself to satisfy someone who sees you as a resource rather than a person. These are internal developments that each person must choose for themselves. This doesn't mean becoming cold or calculating in relationships. It means developing the wisdom to recognize when your masculine energy is being appreciated versus when it's being exploited. Healthy feminine energy enhances masculine energy, inspires it, and creates space for it to flourish. Toxic feminine energy drains masculine energy, manipulates it, and uses it for purposes that serve neither person's highest good. The key insight Jung would offer is that these patterns reveal themselves quickly if you know what to look for and trust your instincts. Your body knows when something feels wrong, even when your mind can't articulate it. Your energy levels tell you when someone is draining versus nourishing you. Your emotional state reveals whether a relationship is creating peace or chaos in your life. The experienced man has learned to trust these internal signals rather than dismissing them in favor of hope, potential, or the desire to be understanding. He understands that his time, energy, and emotional investment are precious resources that should be given to people who appreciate and reciprocate them rather than to those who consume them without gratitude. Jung's ultimate message is that psychological awareness becomes your greatest protection. When you understand these patterns, you can recognize them early and make conscious choices about how to respond. You can maintain compassion for people struggling with these issues while protecting yourself from becoming another casualty of their unresolved psychological patterns. The goal isn't to avoid all difficulty in relationships, but to distinguish between the challenges that come from two people growing together and the chaos that comes from one person's refusal to grow at all. Healthy relationships involve conflict, compromise, and occasional disappointment. Toxic relationships involve constant drama, manipulation, and the gradual erosion of your sense of self. Most importantly, Jung understood that recognizing these patterns allows you to appreciate genuine feminine energy when you encounter it. When you know what toxic looks like, you can immediately recognize the difference when you meet a woman who has done her own psychological work, who approaches relationships as partnership rather than exploitation, and who enhances your life rather than complicating it. The experienced man doesn't carry these insights as weapons against women or as reasons to avoid relationships entirely. He carries them as wisdom that allows him to invest his masculine energy where it will be appreciated, reciprocated, and used to create something beautiful together. This wisdom becomes the foundation for the kind of relationships that Jung believed were possible when two psychologically mature people choose to build a life together, rather than using each other to avoid building lives individually. Understanding these patterns isn't the end of your relationship journey. It's the beginning of conscious choice in relationships, which is where real love and genuine partnership become possible.